Listen. Before this story fully opens itself to you, I want you to slow down your breathing just a little. Not because something dramatic is about to explode, but because something honest is about to unfold. This is not a story meant to impress you. It's not here to motivate you for a moment and then disappear. It's not even here to make you feel better right away. This story is here to sit with you. Especially if you're tired of pretending you're okay. Because this is a story about finding God when you are empty. Not metaphorically empty. Not spiritually poetic empty. But empty in the way that scares you. Empty in the way that makes silence feel loud. Empty in the way that makes you wonder if faith was ever real to begin with. And here's the question that will quietly follow you through every word from this moment forward. What if the moment you thought God left was actually the moment He stayed the closest? Stay with me. Because the truth at the end of this story does not arrive gently. It arrives honestly. The night everything collapsed, there was no warning. No storm shaking the sky. No dramatic phone call at midnight. No moment where Ethan Walker felt the ground give way beneath his feet. The world didn't end loudly. It ended politely. Ethan sat alone in his car, parked across the street from the house he still technically owned, but no longer felt welcome in. The engine was running, humming softly, as if reminding him that time had not stopped just because his life had. The digital clock glowed red. 2:17 a.m. He had been sitting there for over an hour. Hands resting on the steering wheel. Eyes unfocused. Mind suspended somewhere between disbelief and dread. 10 hours earlier, he still believed his life made sense. He had a steady job. The kind people nodded respectfully at when he mentioned it. He had a marriage that others admired quietly, the kind that looked strong without needing to show off. And he had faith, not loud faith, not emotional faith, but disciplined faith. Faith that showed up. Faith that stayed consistent. Faith that believed doing the right things would eventually lead to the right outcomes. Now, none of that existed. The voicemail notification still sat on his phone screen, unread, even though he had already listened to it over and over again. He didn't delete it. He couldn't. As long as it existed, part of his old life still existed too. His wife's voice was calm, but strained, like someone trying not to cry while already exhausted from crying too much. She said she couldn't keep living like this. Said she felt invisible. Said she had been lonely for longer than she could explain. Said she needed space. No accusations. No screaming. No fight. Just a quiet ending. And somehow, that hurt the most. When the message ended, Ethan stared at the dark phone screen until it locked itself. The reflection staring back at him didn't look like someone grieving. It looked like someone empty. Listen, here's something most people don't understand until it happens to them. The worst losses don't always shatter you immediately. Sometimes they hollow you out first. Ethan leaned forward until his forehead touched the steering wheel. A laugh escaped his throat, short, sharp, and completely disconnected from joy. God, he whispered, the word catching in his chest, I did everything right. He wasn't exaggerating. He wasn't lying to himself. He went to church. He prayed. He served when needed. He avoided the things he was told to avoid. He built his life carefully, morally, faithfully. So why did it feel like faith had quietly packed its bags and left? The days that followed moved strangely. Time felt distorted, stretching and compressing without warning. He showered because habit told him to. Ate because hunger reminded him to. Responded to messages because it felt wrong not to. Then came the meeting. A closed office door. Sympathetic faces. Voices lowered to a respectful tone. Words like restructuring and budget adjustments floated through the room, stripped of emotion. His manager spoke kindly, but with distance, the way people do when the decision has already been made and empathy can't change it. 12 years of work ended in 12 minutes. Ethan shook hands. Said thank you. Walked out. 2 losses in 1 week. Still, no tears. Just numbness. Here's a truth that sounds cold, but isn't. The human soul doesn't break all at once. It disconnects first. That Sunday, Ethan still went to church. He sat in the same seat he always did. Sang the same songs. Listened to the same words. But everything felt delayed. As if the room was full of sound, yet none of it reached him on time. Like watching a conversation through thick glass. When the pastor said, "God is close to the brokenhearted," something inside Ethan twisted. Because if this was closeness, it felt unbearable. That night, lying in bed beside an empty space that still smelled faintly like home, Ethan prayed for what he believed would be the last time. He didn't ask for restoration. Didn't ask for comfort. Didn't ask for clarity. He said one sentence. God, I don't feel you anymore. Then he turned toward the wall and stared into the dark until sleep finally took him. He didn't know it yet, but that moment marked the beginning of something far more dangerous than doubt. Silence. Not God's silence. His. Days passed. Then weeks. Bills stacked neatly on the table. Savings drained slowly, painfully. Friends checked in at first, then less often, then not at all. Not because they stopped caring, but because brokenness has a way of making people unsure of what to say. Ethan stopped praying. Not because he was angry. Because it felt pointless. Talking to the ceiling began to feel foolish. His sleep schedule collapsed. Nights stretched endlessly. Days blurred together. He stopped shaving. Stopped answering calls. Stopped looking in mirrors longer than necessary. And then one morning, the envelope appeared on the door. 30 days. Eviction notice. That thin piece of paper felt heavier than every Bible verse he had ever memorized. He folded it carefully and placed it on the table, almost respectfully, as if acknowledging it might soften the reality. That night, he walked. No destination. No plan. Just movement. He passed houses glowing with warm light. Laughter spilled through open windows. Families lived their lives unaware that anything had ended at all. It felt cruel. At the edge of the neighborhood stood a small, forgotten church. Paint chipped. Windows boarded. The cross leaned slightly, as if tired. Ethan slowed his steps. The door wasn't locked. It opened with a creak that echoed through the empty space. Inside, dust hung in the air. The pews were cracked. The altar was bare. No candles. No music. No people. Just silence. He sat in the front pew and stared ahead. And for the first time in weeks, he stopped trying to be respectful. "I trusted you," he said out loud, his voice trembling. "I believed you. I did everything you asked." His words bounced off the walls, returning broken. "Where were you when she left? Where were you when everything fell apart? Where are you now?" Silence answered him. "And this matters more than you think." God did not speak. No warmth. No sign. No reassurance. Nothing. Ethan laughed, louder this time, bitter and raw. "There it is," he said. "Nothing." He stood up, ready to leave, when he noticed movement in the back pew. Someone was sitting there. An old man. Ethan's heart skipped. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't know anyone was here." The man looked up slowly. His eyes were calm in a way that felt unsettling. "No need to apologize," he said. "This place hasn't heard honesty in a long time." Ethan swallowed. "I was just leaving." The man smiled faintly. "Everyone says that when God gets uncomfortable." The sentence landed heavier than expected. "Who are you?" Ethan asked. "Someone who lost everything," the man replied quietly, "and lived." They sat in silence. Then Ethan spoke again, softer now. "I don't think I believe anymore." The old man nodded. "That's usually when belief stops pretending." Ethan frowned. "That doesn't make sense." The man leaned forward slightly. "Faith that survives comfort is common," he said. "Faith that survives loss, that's rare." Something stirred inside Ethan. Not hope. Curiosity. "Where was God," Ethan asked, "when everything fell apart?" The old man paused. Then said, "Closer than you were ready to notice." That night didn't heal anything. But it cracked something open. Ethan went home with a thought he couldn't shake. What if God isn't found when life adds, but when life subtracts? The thought followed Ethan through the night, through sleep that came in fragments, through dreams that felt unfinished. What if God wasn't missing at all? What if God had simply been drowned out by the noise of everything Ethan had built around himself? Morning came quietly. Too quietly. The house felt hollow now, like it had already started forgetting him. He moved from room to room, touching familiar objects as if they might anchor him. A picture frame on the shelf. A mug in the kitchen. A jacket hanging by the door that still carried the faint scent of someone who no longer lived there. He packed slowly. Not because he had much left, but because every object carried memory. Here's the thing no one warned you about. Losing people hurts. Losing identity hurts longer. When Ethan finally locked the door for the last time, the sound echoed louder than it should have. He stood there for a moment, key in hand, wondering if this was what failure looked like. Then he walked away. Living out of his car felt unreal at first. Temporary. Like camping, but without excitement. He told himself it would only be for a little while. Just until he found work. Just until things stabilized. But days passed. Then weeks. and temporary quietly became reality. At night, he parked near the river, where the sound of water softened the noise in his mind. He slept curled in the back seat, waking up stiff and disoriented, forgetting for a moment where he was. Hunger became familiar. Fear became quieter. Pride slowly dissolved. And listen closely, this part matters. When everything is stripped away, the things that once terrified you lose their power. One night, staring at the dark roof of his car, Ethan whispered something he hadn't said in months. "God, if you're still here." His voice caught. "I don't know how to find you." Silence followed. But this time, the silence felt different. Not empty. Just waiting. He whispered it again the next night. And the next. Not because he felt faithful. Because he felt desperate. Weeks later, he wandered into a small soup kitchen downtown. Not because he wanted help, because hunger stopped asking permission. The building was modest. Clean, but worn. Volunteers moved quietly, efficiently, without drama. A woman stood behind the counter. Her hair was tied back loosely. Her eyes were kind, but not naive. She handed Ethan a bowl of soup and said, "Sit. Eat. No questions. No judgment. No curiosity disguised as kindness. Just food." Her name was Clara. They didn't talk much at first. Ethan ate quietly, aware of the other faces in the room, people with stories heavier than his own. People who looked like life had taught them things Ethan was just beginning to learn. He came back the next day. And the day after that. Eventually, conversation found them. Small talk at first. Safe topics. Weather. The food. Then one evening, as the room emptied, Ethan asked her a question that surprised even him. "Why do you do this?" Clara paused. "For a long time," she said slowly, "I thought God had forgotten me." She met his eyes. "But then I realized God was just waiting for me to stop pretending I was fine." That sentence settled into Ethan's chest and stayed there. He began helping at the kitchen. Not officially. Not formally. Just showing up early. Staying late. Washing dishes. Carrying boxes. Something shifted. Not joy. Not peace. Purpose. And here's something shocking, something people rarely admit. Healing doesn't always begin with feeling better. Sometimes it begins with being useful. One evening, as Ethan locked up after closing, he noticed someone sitting outside on the steps. The old man from the church. Same posture. Same calm presence. Ethan froze. "You follow people now?" Ethan asked, half joking. The man smiled. "No. I wait." They sat together in silence for a moment. "You look different," the man said. Ethan shrugged. "I feel the same." The man nodded. That's how transformation usually feels at first. Ethan frowned. "I don't feel transformed." The man smiled gently. "You're still alive. That's not nothing." They talked long into the evening. Ethan told him everything. The job. The marriage. The car. The nights by the river. The old man listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, he asked the question that had been burning quietly inside him. Why didn't God stop it? The man took a long breath. Because stopping it would have kept you full. Ethan blinked. Full of what? The man met his gaze. Full of yourself. The words weren't cruel. They were honest. For a long time, the man continued, God was a part of your life. Not the center. Ethan felt the truth of it immediately, and it hurt. You don't lose God, the man said softly. You lose the noise that blocks him. The weeks turned into months. Ethan found work again. Nothing impressive. Physical. Honest. He earned just enough to survive. Slowly, he saved. Eventually, he rented a small room. He didn't rush back to church. Instead, he prayed quietly. Inconsistently. Honestly. Sometimes all he said was, I'm here. Sometimes he said nothing at all. And here's the part that changes everything. One morning, standing by the river where he once slept in his car, Ethan felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for what he had lost, but for what he had found in the loss. God had not rescued him from nothingness. God had met him inside it. And suddenly, the silence made sense. Listen, this is where the story stops being about Ethan. And starts being about you. Because maybe you didn't lose a house. Maybe you didn't lose a marriage. Maybe you didn't sleep in your car. But you lost something. Certainty. Direction. Faith that felt simple. And you wondered, where is God now? Here's the truth that feels almost offensive when you're hurting. God is not found in control. He's found in surrender. God is not found in answers. He's found in presence. When everything else leaves, God doesn't. He waits. And I'm serious when I say this. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover that God is enough. Ethan never got his old life back. He got something better. A life that didn't need pretending. A faith that didn't need proof. A God who didn't need noise. And if you're still watching this right now, if something inside you feels exposed, if the silence you've been running from suddenly feels familiar, then maybe this wasn't an accident. Maybe God is closer than you think. This is not the end. But it is the turning point. Ethan didn't realize how deeply he had changed until one quiet afternoon when Clara asked him a simple question. Do you miss who you were? She said, handing him a towel to dry the dishes. He paused. The old Ethan would have answered immediately. The confident one. The organized one. The man with plans, timelines, and a clear sense of direction. But now, he wasn't sure. I miss feeling certain, he said finally. Clara nodded, as if she had expected that answer. Certainty feels like safety, she said. But it can also be a cage. Those words lingered with him long after the kitchen closed and the lights were turned off. That night, lying in his small rented room, staring at a ceiling he barely recognized as his own, Ethan realized something unsettling. He wasn't afraid anymore. Not because life had improved dramatically. Not because the future felt secure. but because there was nothing left to protect. And listen, this is one of the strangest truths of faith. When you have nothing left to lose, you finally become free enough to trust. Ethan began noticing God in places he never had before. In the quiet patience of the elderly man who came for soup every Tuesday. In the laughter of a volunteer who had lost her son but still showed up smiling. In the way hunger humbled everyone the same, regardless of background or belief. This wasn't the God he had learned about in structured sermons and neatly outlined teachings. This God was messy, unexpected, uncomfortable, but unmistakably real. One evening, after closing, Ethan found the old man sitting inside the kitchen instead of outside. "You look lighter," the man said. Ethan smiled faintly. "I don't feel lighter." "That's because lightness isn't a feeling," the man replied. "It's a release." Ethan leaned against the counter. "Release from what?" The old man looked at him carefully. "From the belief that your life was ever yours to control." That sentence landed slowly. Ethan had spent his entire adult life trying to build a life that proved something. Stability, respect, success, faithfulness. But beneath it all was fear. Fear of failure. Fear of being exposed. Fear of not being enough. And fear, he was learning, made a terrible god. "I used to think faith was about holding on," Ethan said quietly. The old man smiled. "Most people do." "And now?" "Now you're learning it's about letting go." Weeks passed. Then months. Ethan started sharing his story quietly. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Just honestly. When someone asked how he ended up where he was, he didn't sanitize it. "I lost everything," he would say. And then, after a pause, "And I found God there." Some people nodded. Some people looked uncomfortable. Some people walked away. But a few stayed. And those were the ones who needed it most. Here's something that might surprise you. The Bible is filled with people who found God at their lowest, not their strongest. Moses met God after exile. David met God in caves. Elijah met God in exhaustion. Peter met grace after failure. And Jesus met humanity at the point of death. Why? Because desperation strips away illusions. One cold morning, Ethan woke before sunrise and walked down to the river. The water moved steadily, indifferent to his presence, just as it always had. He remembered sleeping in his car there, believing his life was over. Standing in the same place now, he realized something that sent a shiver through him. God had never promised him comfort. God had promised presence. And presence had been there the whole time. The prayers that felt unanswered. The silence that felt cruel. The waiting that felt endless. None of it was abandonment. It was invitation. Invitation to trust without guarantees. Invitation to love without certainty. Invitation to believe without control. Ethan whispered a prayer, not because he felt obligated, but because gratitude demanded expression. "Thank you," he said softly, "for not leaving." The answer didn't come as words. It came as peace. Not the absence of problems. Not the assurance of success. but the quiet certainty that he was not alone. Listen, if you've stayed with this story this long, there's a reason. Because somewhere along the way, Ethan's story stopped being just his. It began echoing yours. Maybe you're watching this late at night, when doubts get louder. Maybe you're watching this with questions you're afraid to ask out loud. Maybe you've done everything right, and still lost everything anyway. And you've wondered, did God leave me? Here's the truth that changes everything. God does not abandon his children in their darkest hour. He meets them there. But he rarely announces himself. He waits quietly, patiently, lovingly, until we stop running. Ethan's life didn't suddenly become perfect. But it became honest. And honesty, he learned, is where God feels most at home. One evening, as Ethan locked the soup kitchen door, Clara looked at him and smiled. "You're different," she said. He chuckled softly. "I've been different for a while." "No," she replied. "You're awake now." That night, Ethan realized something that made his heart ache in the best possible way. Losing everything didn't destroy his faith. It stripped it down to its foundation. And that foundation held. There was one last truth Ethan had not yet faced. It came quietly. Not in a sermon. Not in a vision. Not in a sudden miracle. It came in a moment so ordinary that he almost missed it. One evening, long after the soup kitchen had closed, Ethan stayed behind alone. The lights were dim. The building was silent. He moved slowly, wiping down the counters, stacking chairs, doing things that no one would ever notice. As he worked, a thought surfaced, uninvited, unexpected. If my life had not collapsed, I would never be here. The realization stopped him cold. If the marriage hadn't ended, if the job hadn't disappeared, if the money hadn't run out, he would still be chasing control. Still measuring worth by success. Still believing God existed mainly to bless his plans. Ethan leaned against the counter and closed his eyes. And then it hit him. The thing that finally broke him was the very thing that saved him. And listen, this is where the story turns from comforting to confronting. What if the worst thing that ever happened to you was also the most merciful interruption of your life? What if God didn't stop the collapse because the collapse was the answer? Ethan remembered all the prayers he had prayed before everything fell apart. They were careful prayers, polite prayers, safe prayers. Bless this. Protect that. Help me succeed. But the prayer God answered was the one Ethan never intentionally prayed. Take what doesn't belong. That night, Ethan sat alone in the quiet and wept, not from sadness, but from clarity. For the first time, he saw his past with honesty instead of resentment. God hadn't failed him. God had freed him. Freed him from a version of faith that depended on outcomes. Freed him from an identity that could be taken away. Freed him from a God he tried to manage instead of trust. And here's the shocking truth most people resist. If God had given Ethan what he wanted, Ethan would have lost what he needed. The next morning, Ethan returned to the river. The same river where he once slept in his car, convinced his life was over. He stood there longer than usual. And then he spoke, not loudly, not dramatically. Here I am, he said. No demands. No bargaining. No fear. Just presence. And presence answered him back. Not as a voice in the sky, but as a deep, unshakable knowing. You are seen. You are held. You were never abandoned. Ethan smiled through tears. Because now he understood something that would have offended him in his old life. God does his deepest work in the places we try hardest to avoid. Suffering was not proof of God's absence. It was the place where illusions died. Months later, someone new came into the soup kitchen, a man with tired eyes and shaking hands. He sat alone, staring into his bowl like it might disappear. Ethan recognized the look immediately. He sat beside him. You won't believe me right now, Ethan said gently, but this isn't the end. The man laughed bitterly. Feels like it. Ethan nodded. Yeah. It usually does. They sat in silence. And in that silence, God was there again. Not fixing. Not explaining. Just present. Years later, Ethan would look back and realize something that still stunned him. The life he once begged God to restore was the life that kept him from truly knowing God. And losing it was the beginning of everything real. Listen, if you are still here, still listening, still breathing with this story, then you need to hear this next part slowly. Because it's not for Ethan anymore. It's for you. Maybe you are standing in the ruins of something you loved. Maybe you are staring at a future that terrifies you. Maybe your prayers feel empty and your faith feels thin. And you've asked the question that hurts the most. Why didn't God stop this? Here's the truth, spoken gently but honestly. God sometimes allows what he could prevent, to accomplish what he could never force. Trust. Surrender. Dependence. When everything else is gone, God does not rush in to replace it. He reveals that he was always enough. And I'm serious when I say this. If your life feels like it's falling apart, it might actually be falling into place. Not the place you expected, but the place where God can finally reach you. Ethan never became famous, never became rich, never got his old life back. But he gained something far greater. A faith that could survive silence. A hope that didn't depend on outcomes. A relationship with God that nothing could take away. And now, before this story truly ends, let me speak to you directly. If this story stirred something in you, if it put words to pain you've been carrying quietly, if it reminded you that God meets us in the lowest places, please don't let this moment pass. Like this video, not for us, but so this message reaches someone else who feels lost. Share it with someone who needs hope more than advice. Subscribe to Parables of Hope. Your support allows us to keep creating stories that bring light into dark places, faith into silence, and hope into broken hearts. Go back and watch our previous videos. Let them walk with you. Let them remind you that you are not alone. And if you're still searching, still waiting, still hurting, remember this. God has not abandoned you. He is waiting for you. Right where everything else fell apart. Stay. Listen. Trust. Because sometimes, You find God when you have nothing left.